humor and entertainment is a weapon. There's no doubt about it. And therefore, the left, seeing this as a war, is not going to cede to us this weapon.
A new silver company for investors, with Keith Neumeyer agreeing to become a major shareholder. Luke Norman, co-founder of Gold Standard Ventures, is the new chairman, and the company has acquired 3 former First Majestic silver properties. To learn more about this must-own silver stock,
go to crushthestreet.com/silver1. That's crushthestreet.com/silver1. Everyone, and welcome into crushthestreet.com. I'm Kenneth Amaduri, and I got an interesting guest on the line with me today, Evan Sayet, conservative comedian, actually, and really not too many out there. The biggest comedians I can think of in the mainstream: Trevor Noah, Stephen Colbert, John Oliver, even SNL has come out as a constant hit piece on Trump. But all of these names, I mean, hard left agendas. And even Tim Allen's show, Last Man Standing, highly rated, booted off the air. People liked it. And any risk of a conservative movement gaining momentum, from what I can tell, and we'll talk about this in the introduction here with our guests, seems to just get booted off the air. And it's interesting because comedy connects with people. And it's a dangerous thing because the left seems to have monopolized that whole entertainment space. And there's a political agenda behind that. And when you laugh, it transcends politics, your beliefs. And you laugh, you create a bond with that person. And there's a major effort to shut down conservative thought, especially when it comes to comedy, because I believe it's very powerful. Evan Sayet is on the line. His website is evansayet.com. He's the author of The Kindergarden of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. Evan, thanks for coming on the line with me today.
Kenneth, it's my pleasure.
Well, sir, I just want to kind of get your thoughts there on my introduction and kind of what have you experienced as a conservative comedian?
Yeah, look, you're absolutely right. The left sees this, and by this I mean everything, as a war. And to allow their side to be dinged with humor, with wit, with satire, they see it as actually surrendering in the war. Humor and entertainment is a weapon. There's no doubt about it. And therefore, the left, seeing this as a war, is not going to cede to us this weapon.
Wow. Well, when it comes to comedy, what's your experience with connecting with an audience? When you make someone laugh, there's something unique about that someone bonds with the comedian, the person talking, no matter what their initial beliefs are. And that's a powerful tool, and we've seen that be a major political weapon. I mean, Comedy Central has become a news platform for the world.
Yeah, I mean, the left has ceded their position as entertainers, and they've substituted vitriol for comedy, vitriol for humor. There was no humor. Listen, I've been on the political spectrum. I've been on the left, and then as I grew up and matured and learned more about the world, I moved to the right. But I have written in my career for just about everybody on the political spectrum. I mean, I was for many years a writer for the Arsenio Hall Show, so I was the voice of Black America. I then wrote a show called the Oak Ridge Boys, live from Las Vegas, so I was the voice of as redneck white America as you could be. I wrote Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher, so I was as writing for as left a person as you could, and I helped create a game show called Win Ben Stein's Money, so I put words in the mouth of one of the most conservative icons out there. And the reason I was able to do that was because you boil down the joke to its essence. A joke is a joke is a joke. You may change the wording, you may change the target somewhat, but the joke is a joke is a joke. But the left no longer seeks to be humorous. There's no humor. There's no turn of a phrase. There's no cleverness to holding a severed, bloody head of the president of the United States. I can laugh at jokes at the expense of conservatives, even at the expense of myself, even at the expense of my people, the Jews or Americans or whatever, if the joke is funny. The problem is that the left no longer has a sense of humor because they don't see their job to be entertaining. They see themselves as weapons and warriors, just as Nidal Hassan had a business card when he opened fire at Fort Hood that said warrior for Allah. Well, these people should be carrying cards that say warrior for leftism.
Yeah, well, Kathy Griffin was a prime recent example of that, just very spiteful.
Another one is Stephen Colbert. There was absolutely nothing witty, clever. There was no turn of a phrase. There was just nothing that makes a joke in his vulgar, hateful, and despicable, and by the way, utterly dishonest diatribe against President Trump.
Yeah, it's spiteful. It's not funny. It's coming at it from a very spiteful point.
Well, the expression that I use is they have substituted vitriol for humor.
Evan, let's talk about your thoughts on the climate accord. Trump, man, what a statement he made by coming out and really backing out of that. And it really felt like election campaigning Trump. I know it kind of seemed like he lost some ground and his control over the party with some of the things that had happened in the first 100 days of his presidency here. But I felt like that was a big moment for him to come out against this bad agreement, and liberals are acting as if the climate deal, if it didn't go through, I mean, we're all going to start immediately suffocating. But you start looking at the deal, and oh my gosh, it's just a complete horrible agreement that. Of course, it's bad if the U.S. comes out. It's the U.S. is the biggest contributor to this socialized system, the socialized program. So just any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, first of all, the whole climate change scheme, the whole gimmick behind it is a socialist redistribution of wealth. There is nobody who really believes. I mean, there are what I call the mindless foot soldiers, the people who just take whatever the left says and take it to heart and take it to their soul. But there's no scientist who really believes that man-made global warming is this horrific thing that's about to destroy the world. I mean, even if you did, how do you believe that in, let's say, 2006, when they said in 10 years Florida will be underwater, and 10 years later Florida is exactly where it was 10 years ago. I mean, at a certain point you come to recognize that the same people who seek economic redistribution, who seek what they call social justice, which means punishing the successful and rewarding the failed, you see the same people putting in place a policy that would not actually do anything to improve the environment. If they were really concerned about the environment, then every single nation on the planet would be asked to sacrifice starting right now. The idea that there's a 5-year delay before China has to do anything, where other nations are totally exempt, where third world nations not only are exempt but get free money, you come to recognize it's simply another socialist redistribution scheme, this on a global level. It's funny, one of the lines from my act, and because it's part of a bigger bit, standing alone, it might not be as funny as I think it is, but I have a line about Hollywood leftists. I say, if they really believe the oceans are rising, why do they all live on the beach?
Yeah, pointing out some obvious truths there. That's funny.
And by the way, going back to why comedy is particularly something that the left guards and will not, is because in a intelligent back and forth conversation, you could say, oh, I can see your point. Oh, that made a good point. But when you are making a joke at someone else's expense, when you are ridiculing them and exposing in a way that makes their arguments not just wrong, but laughable, that is one of the most powerful things. And that's why Saul Alinsky made one of his rules for radicals, or in the book Rules for Radicals, said ridicule is the most powerful weapon of all.
Evan, we've seen the shutdown of Milo Yiannopoulos and Ann Coulter, both controversial, even with those that agree with their politics, but they face some violent opposition against the radical left. And really, I don't see conservatives burning down doors and, at Comedy Central because they don't agree with Trevor Noah, let's say, like we're seeing these liberal colleges do, and just in general. Any thoughts on this?
Sure. Violence has always been the purview of the left in America, whether it was William Ayres and the Weather Underground and the murders and the bombs that they planted, whether it's Occupy Wall Street, a violent movement, not just violent against the people they disagree with, but even inside their camps, there are rapes and there are murders. The whole idea of no justice, no peace is a violent threat, that if we don't give them what they say they want, then there's going to be war. The violence has always been the means of the left for a very simple reason. They cannot argue thoughtfully, factually, reasonably, and have people come to a conclusion that agrees with them. Because, the name of my book is The Kindergarten of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks. And in it, I argue that the modern liberal was morally and intellectually retarded at the level of the 5-year-old child. When he entered kindergarten, he was taught that thinking is an act of bigotry. And therefore, there is nothing the modern liberal believes that is a function of rational thought. So when it comes time to try to convince others of the things they believe in, since they arrived at their position without the benefit of thought, they don't have thought as a means to persuade others. This leaves only demagoguery, intimidation, and violence.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And one of the things that I have here on my notes is I feel like most people live their own personal lives, like a conservative or maybe even a libertarian. When it comes to the government, however, they're okay with breaking the rules. Now, for an example, on the personal level, if we go to dinner, we don't pay the bill based on income. We pay it based on consumption. And if someone wants to be charitable, they might go out of their way and out of their heart pay for the table. But in government, where there's a buffer between our voice and our consequences, the rules seem to be broken. Any follow-up thoughts on that?
Sure. One of my heroes, and perhaps you know him as well from the radio and his other works, is a guy named Dennis Prager. And Dennis Prager points out that a good many people who vote Democrat, who would call themselves liberal, who are silent, if not actually supportive of liberal fascism, live their lives as conservatives. Bruce Springsteen, who is a touchstone for me because I know he's not a stupid man. He's actually quite brilliant. I know he's not an evil man. In fact, he's actually quite decent. And yet here he is supporting every evil concept on the planet. But he lives his life like a conservative. He's married to the same woman now for 30-something years. He doesn't use drugs. He doesn't fall out of trees drunk. He actually goes to church. His children were baptized. And what Prager says in such a brilliant line is, if only they would preach what they practice. But because to the modern liberal, thinking is an act of bigotry, and whatever it is they choose is simply a matter of taste. So they might live this particular life, even recognize it as the reason for their own personal success. But when it comes time to take that idea out into the general populace and argue on behalf of heterosexual marriage, argue on the of monogamy, argue on behalf of the church, argue on behalf of hard work, they're not willing to do it because they're afraid that what they believe is nothing other than their prejudices. Therefore, not only won't they champion it in the public square, but if you champion it in the public square, they will argue against you. They will actually argue against their own values because they see values as personal tastes, not as universal truths.
Evan, one of the things that I was watching some of your videos, and you talk about liberals thinking that we're living in a zero-sum world. And I felt like this was very motivational, something you talk about. And you debunk the idea that your success comes from someone else's expense. And really, does a rising tide lift all boats? That's not what liberals think. They think it's someone else's success it comes from someone else's expense. But I'd love for you to expand on that a little more and share what your thoughts are behind this, because I think it's very motivational.
Yeah, this is one of the 2 or 3 huge differences in how the left and the right see the world that affects everything else that they believe in all of their other policies. Because if you believe the world is zero-sum, that my success causes your failure, then the way that you eliminate failure is by eliminating success. But if you recognize that all ships rise with the rising tide, then the way you eliminate failure is to encourage success, because the greater my success, then your ship rises as well. And the example that I often use is Bill Gates. Bill Gates' fortune did not come at my expense. It makes no difference to me how rich Bill Gates gets, because not only did his inventions and his creations not sink my ship, not only did they not come at my expense, but because of his inventions, I actually have gotten richer. I can write my screenplays more quickly. I can research. Oh my goodness, I have no idea how people did research before the internet and before the personal computer. And they had to go down to libraries and look through stacks, and how I just say, okay, Siri, or I just click a Google search or whatever it is I do, thanks to the personal computer. And I can now write a screenplay in half the time or a quarter of the time it would have taken me else in another time in another place. So the idea that Bill Gates' success has hurt me is ridiculous. In fact, Bill Gates' success helped me. And just like in America, if you think that the world is zero-sum, then America is the greatest cause of injustice and sorrow in the history of the world. After all, our unprecedented riches must be causing the poverty that is seen elsewhere. So your goal, if you're a liberal, then, is to undermine America's success. Going back to the Paris Accords, that's the entire point of that, and the Kyoto Protocols, is to shackle American and Western industrial nations, to punish us so that we cannot continue to succeed, to confiscate the quote-unquote ill-gotten gains of our success, and to redistribute it to the failures. So if you think the world is zero-sum, then you see America as the cause of the greatest suffering in the history of the world. But if you recognize that all ships rise with the rising tide, then you recognize America as the greatest boon, the greatest blessing in the history of the world. And if you look at the left and you look at the right, you see the left despises America and the right adores America. And you can extend this to one other nation. Why in the world does the left have such hatred for the Jews of Israel? I mean, after all, you're talking about a liberal democracy, lowercase l, lowercase d, with gay pride parades and a woman prime minister all the way back in the 1960s. You're talking about a nation on this planet that the liberals should adore, and yet this is the one and only nation that the liberals want to strangle to death economically with sanctions and boycotts and divestment. Why this tiny liberal democracy of Israel? For no other reason than that it's because it's successful. Because Israel has built a culture that has Tel Aviv with its gleaming skyscrapers. Because Israel has, I believe it's the third of all the nations on the planet having listings on NASDAQ. All right, new companies in the technological stock market. There's China, there's America, and then there's this minuscule nation of Israel. So if you believe all ships rise with the rising tide, then you appreciate and love the innovation that comes out of Israel. But if you think that the world is zero-sum, then you despise Israel, perhaps not as much as America, but second most.
Wow. Well, you put some important concepts into some clear thought right there. I want to close out this interview with the last topic here. I want to get your thoughts on whether or not you think the left will be able to shut down Trump, and if you think he will be a two-term president.
Yeah, I will say this. We are very lucky, and perhaps it's providence, perhaps it's God, but it seems that at just the time when we needed it most, technology has afforded us the opportunity to work our way around the evil, the corrupt, the fascists who are trying to shut things down. You know, I go back to 2004 when Dan Rather tried to steal the elections by using forged documents against President Bush to try to steal the election for John Kerry. And it was just at that moment that this new technology that Al Gore invented, the internet, had grown to a point where we had what we called the blogosphere. And it was just at that moment that the technology was such that we could show the lie, debunk the materials, the evidence that Rather was using. You know, and fortunately we're at a time now where there's alternative media, where there's a way to get the truth out there in a way that didn't exist for 8, 12, 16 years ago. So will Trump be able to survive this onslaught? You know, after the election, the Democrats had two choices. They could grow up and recognize the reality that their policies had gone so far radically left that it alienated the good, hardworking, decent people of America, even in states that had previously voted for them, even in Pennsylvania, even in Wisconsin, even in Michigan. Or they could double down on their hate and their lies and their corruption. And sadly, they've chosen to double down on their hate, their lies, and their corruption. And this is a war, Kenneth. It really is. This is a culture war. Thus far, it's remained relatively nonviolent, although the left is, as it always is, violent. And we're just going to have to go out there and fight it every day. Very quickly, I have a program I call Adopt a Democrat. That is, you find one person in your life who you know isn't a radical leftist, who doesn't believe this nonsense about cultural appropriation and microaggressions and safe rooms. And over the course of time, and this is something we do wrong, we try to convince people instantly because we are so sure that we are right, because we are right, that if we just explained it to them, they would see. And so we try to win these debates. Instead of doing that, think of it like adopting a child. You don't make everything a teachable moment. If you did, your child would despise you. But over the course of a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you slowly bring these people over to our side by pointing out the facts. And I'm telling you, if you do that, I have changed people. And I'll finish with this, Kenneth. Think about this. If every one of us changes just one person, we double our numbers.
Evan, I wanted to get one more question in, and there's speculation that Hilary Clinton is going to try to run again in 2020. She's meeting with donors and recruiting people for certain PACs. The story isn't fully explored yet, but what an incredible amount of deployed capital the Democrats have poured already into someone who is largely disliked and a complete criminal. For her to come around again and into the spotlight. What any thoughts on whether or not you think that's going to happen? And I mean, is that just the end of the Democrat Party?
It's not going to happen. You know, she got the nomination this time because she was owed it, because they gave it to Obama when it was supposed to be hers. There was still the sense that Bill Clinton was this force and that he shows himself more and more not to be. And in 4 or 8 years, he's going to be even more dissipated and wacky than he was on this last campaign trail. The whole thing about the Clinton Foundation, they're not getting any money. You know, if you want to calculate exactly how much was paid to her for influence, for her selling influence, take the fees that she got for speeches when she was in power, subtract the fees that she's getting now, and the difference between the two is what they paid for influence.
Yeah, and it's unbelievable how much she failed in comparison to Trump. I mean, the official numbers was what Trump spent $250 million, and she spent somewhere in the lines of like $2 to $3 billion. for the course of her campaign. It was like a tenth. But that's not even counting all the donations she received. It's unbelievable how badly her marketing campaign failed.
And the Democrats won't do it again, and especially because even amongst the votes that she did get, they weren't from the next generation. So in 4 years and 8 years, the remainder of the Clinton camp is just going to be older, is just going to be no longer with us. That's a dying thing. The Clinton dynasty is a dying thing. And no, I mean, on the horizon, and it's not going to be Bernie Sanders. And so I don't know who they have on their bench. Elizabeth Warren? Well, we'll see, but it's not going to be Hillary.
All right, Evan, thank you for coming on the show. If people want to learn more about you, pick up your book, where would they go and what would they find?
Sure, they should go to Evan Sayet, EVAN, S as in Sam, AYET.com. If you can't remember that, just remember Sayet, SAYET, and Google it. There aren't that many with my name. The Kindergarden of Eden, How the Modern Liberal Thinks, is the definitive explanation. You can see my Heritage Foundation speech, which is the single most viewed lecture in their entire history. Or you can hire me to speak if you have enough money. Go to evansayet.com.
Well, Evan, hey, I appreciate you coming on the line and taking the time with us. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Ken. Talk soon.